What's up, guys? I'm Shawnthebro. We are here for an episode of a new series this time. This is the Super Smash Brothers fighting game Unreal Engine C++ tutorial. So basically what it is we're going to recreate a Super Smash Brothers Melee, Brawl, whatever style game in Unreal Engine. Specifically Unreal Engine 4, UE4, with C++ components, which is here in Visual Studio, and some blueprints such as the HUD, as you'll see here. This is the first episode, so if you've seen some of my other programming series, you might have noticed that I follow a pretty similar trend between each game for the first episode. I try and get inputs working, and then something like health or damage. This one will be a little bit different. This is going to be basically a working HUD for your major components here, as well as damage, which you'll see here, and then your regular movement that comes with the side scroller template. So, if you have Unreal Engine 4 and C++, we can get started. If not, I'll leave a link in the description. You can go download them for free down below. Basically, you're just going to download them, and then you're going to create a new project in Unreal Engine, and it will make the C++ files for you. So if you ever want to make your own Super Smash Brothers game, here we go. You go to File, and then you can do New Project, or if you're just at the Unreal screen, which I'll actually show you here. This isn't exactly what I was trying to open, but this will work. I'm just trying to show you the launcher. Here we go. So if you're at this screen right here and you haven't made anything, then you can also just do New Project. For following this tutorial, we're going to be using C++. So switch over to the C++ tab and go to the side scroller. If you want to do sprite-based fighting games, kind of like Super Smash Flash and things of that genre, then you might want to do 2D side scroller that has the paper 2D version. For us, we're just going to do the regular side scroller because you can always put in paper flipbooks and 2D sprites into your 3D game. So it gives you a lot more freedom, but of course it's going to take up more space and be a little bit more complicated, things like that. But nothing we can't handle, so I'd recommend just making the regular side scroller in this case. You can keep everything the same. You could make this scalable 3D or 2D again if you want to do sprites, but I would just leave it the same until you know more about the direction you want to go. And then your folder path and your name. So it's that simple. You change those, you hit create project, and then you're good to go. We're good to start making some... Whoops, I should do this again. We're good to start making some Unreal Engine Super Smash Bros. Games. While this loads up and we get ready here, I do want to say that this is one of the harder games, if not the hardest, or I shouldn't say hardest. It's one of the most rigorous. It'll require a lot of effort to get it to the place that you want it to be. However, a really good thing about it is every time you make a change in the Super Smash Brothers genre, you can really feel it. Like, for example, we just got started. This HUD, though, feels so much more like Super Smash Brothers than pretty much any other HUD. You see this, you kind of get that vibe, or like the PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale vibe. You get that vibe of, oh, I'm going to be taking damage, but I don't necessarily have like a health bar. I have the character that I am, my name, and then, you know, something relating to my state, which in this case is a damage counter that starts at 0 and goes up. So that's one really good thing about Unreal 2, is that it makes it really easy for us to do all this. So let's get started. The first thing I would do is the code part. I always love to start with the code part first because, well, it basically sets your entire foundation for what you're going to do. Now, when you make your Unreal project, it will already make C++ files for you. So you don't have to open up Visual Studio. It should actually open when you make your new Unreal project. If for whatever reason it doesn't, it's fine. Just go to Visual Studio, find this solution file. It'll be in your Unreal project, in your file directory. Okay, so once you're in here, I'd recommend for today to just open up 2 files. This SSB template character.h and SSB template character.cpp. Now, these are mine because my project is called SSB template. You can see it right here. So whatever you named your project is what these characters will be, plus character on the end of them. So all you have to do is go to the Solution Explorer on your right and search for it. In my case, it's SSB template character. And then they'll pop up here. Open up the CPP and the header file. There we go. So don't worry if you've never learned code before. I'm going to go over it now. I'm not going to give you too in-depth of a solution to each of these and the reason that I chose to do it this way, but I'll explain it enough so that you'll understand it regardless if you know code or not. If you have any particular questions, feel free to ask me down below or join our Discord, which I'll see if I can link here. I don't think I can link Discords in the iCards, but it's definitely in the description. And I'll give you more personal help on there. We also have a few other guys in there that can help out if I'm not available at the time. So anyway, when you go to this file, this is the header file, you'll see something very similar to what I have. You'll see a few additions like this enum, and these are functions that I wrote and some variables I added, but you'll see this stuff. You don't really have to worry about any of it, to be honest, right now. None of it's really anything you need to know except you have your jump and move right functionality already in your character. So you won't have to do anything to make him move or jump. If you go into the game right now, you won't have my HUD or anything, but you will be able to do all this. So as long as you can do that, then you made the project correctly and you're ready to start adding the additional functionality. So this template character is going to be like your parent character. So this parent character is going to have all the variables you want to use for any of your characters. Or you'd want to use for all your characters, excuse me. So not specifics, like if you're doing, say you are using Nintendo characters, you don't want to put like, is breathing fire as a variable in here if Bowser's the only character that does that. This is meant for overall things that will be in every character. So in my case, there were 3 things in particular that I wanted to put in every character right off the bat. The first one is the character class, is what I'm calling it. This is a enum, which if you're not familiar with enums or enumeration, it's basically a number that represents something else. So in this case, this number is representing the character type that we are. So it's a little confusing because I called it default, but default here is referring to the mannequin. If you haven't selected an actual character or you're playing as a default character, you're going to be the mannequin. If I add 5 characters and I have Mario, Luigi, Peach, Bowser, Donkey Kong, then my values here would be like VE Mario, VE Bowser, or whatever. This U meta you don't have to have. You can take it out and it should be fine. I've always put it because I use it at work and things like that, so I'm familiar with it. But all this does is it changes your display name. So when you're looking at your list of enums, say in the blueprint, when you're setting the HUD and setting art assets and things like that, your display name would be like mannequin. So we can actually do that too if we want. We can make this mannequin instead of default. That way if someone else comes and looks at this code, or it's been a while since I've edited this code, I can be like, oh yeah, default was mannequin. That's all that is. So you can copy this code if you're interested. You don't technically need to do this, but I would very much recommend it. It'll make your life a lot easier down the road, and it'll even make it easier by the end of this episode. And then right here, I just make a variable of this character class. So eCharacter class is the name of the enum right here. So I'm just making it an object reference. Well, an object instance. So eCharacter class, and I just called it character class. This U property you see above makes it so that it can be seen and edited in Blueprint. This is something we'll need for our HUD, our heads-up display, our user interface. You'll need this so that we can get these variables in Blueprint and then use them to change images and set the name and things like that. So you can feel free to copy this exact one. If you have any questions about any of the specific arguments within these functions, let me know. Okay, so that's all for the character class. So you have this enum. Make sure you put blueprint type. This is important. That way we can get it in Blueprint. And then the enum object instance, which is right here. Character class. That's part one. The second part is simply the damage counter. The damage counter is, when you get hit, your damage goes up. If you eat food, your damage might go down. That way, when you get hit, you don't fly as far. Things like that. So you're going to do the same U property that you use for the enum in the character class. And I made it an integer. An integer doesn't have decimals in this case. So, or pretty much in any case. If it does have decimals, they get truncated. So basically they get removed and they'll get ignored. But the reason I made this an integer is you never see it being a float in Super Smash Brothers. Now you could definitely make this a float or a double, which are just variables that have decimal points and values in those decimal points, or values after that decimal point, excuse me. So you could feel free to do that, and that would actually work fine. I did it as an integer to make it cleaner. But you're definitely going to be doing math that'll require floats and doubles, especially when doing the launching of the characters upon getting hit. So you might want to make it a float here. You can do it either way. If you make it an integer, it'll just be, the math will be slightly off. But I think personally for now, this is fine. If we find that the launching is looking really ugly compared to what we expect or something like that, that would be the decimal point precision, but I really, really doubt it's going to make that much of a difference. So I just made an integer for now. That way you don't have to worry about truncating it by yourself or anything like that. It's not hard, so either way, but I just wanted to explain that. So this is your damage counter. This is what's reading 0% at the start. Okay, and then lastly, I made some functions that do things with the damage counter. So I made one called determine damage counter value. It's kind of a convoluted name, but basically I didn't want to say add to damage value or subtract from damage value. I just want one function that if you take damage, great, then your damage goes up. If you heal, great, your damage goes down. So all this is a function that takes in damage. If this value is negative, then we will heal. If this value is positive, then we will be taking damage. And just make sure you do ufunction blueprint callable above it. This makes it so we can actually call the function from blueprint if needed. For now, we won't need to. So it doesn't really matter if you put that in there. But there's a good chance at some point we will need to, or we could find a use for it. So I think it's a good idea to start with that. If we end up not using it, we can remove it. No big deal. I have a void reset damage counter, which, again, not necessary, but if you're doing multiple rounds or when you die in a stock match or when you die in general even, then I figured just set it back to the default value. It could be 0 if you're in like sudden death or something. It might be 300 if you somehow have stock in sudden death, however you decide to do it. But just basically reset it to its default value is all that function is meant to do. Lastly, I have this void debug take damage. So debug functions are good that you can test them before the actual functionality is complete. So I wanted to test damage today with you guys so you could see it, but we don't have like enemies to hit against and to take damage, so I wrote a debug function. So that's it for the code. I'll show you the C++ part of it, of course, but that's all you'll actually have to add in terms of new variables, new functions, things like that. And you don't even need these if you don't want them. You will need this one, the determine damage counter value. You don't need the reset damage counter, and you can also go without the debug take damage if you'd like. I would suggest it because you could test it, and testing is always good. Making assumptions in code is bad. Okay, so then in the C++ file, I just set the damage counter to 0 in the constructor here. The constructor is the very first function that you'll see in this case. It's basically just going to be the class name with parentheses at the end of it. And something I'm going to do actually is character class equals, I already forget what it's called. I think it's VE default. I wish I could spell. Right. It is VE default E character class. There we go. So what this is doing is setting the default class. If you haven't picked like Mario, Bowser, whatever, you're gonna have 0 damage counter, and your default class is gonna be default, which is, or your character class is gonna be default, which is the mannequin class in our case. Again, you don't technically have to do this, but it's good programming practice. On one of my last videos, someone commented saying, "Oh, this is bad programming practice." That's fine. Like, I appreciate that you're trying to educate people the right way. I get that. A lot of times when I do this, I'm trying to make it pretty simple so that it's easy to understand the first time through, because you know, I went to school for programming, so I don't expect it to be like, oh, yep, this is how you do it, and then everyone picks up on it right away. I didn't pick on it right away, so I don't know. Either way, I just feel the need to say that now. This is just something you should do. I'd recommend it. It's the way I would do it. Is set defaults for your variables in the constructor. Okay, and then these functions are really short, so no sweat. So this is the determine damage counter value. Now, the purpose of this, remember, is to add damage or to heal. So in our case, we're taking in a damage value. I did a safety check because in Smash Bros, you can only go up to 999% of damage. So if the damage counter plus the incoming damage is less than 1000, then add it. If it's not, we just return the standard value. And even better yet is what we should do is if we say else, damage counter equals 999. Basically, if it is greater than 1000, just set it to be the highest possible value that we want to showcase, which we don't want to showcase above 1000, so that's 999. Notice, if you do plus equals here, damage counter, that's our value that's keeping track of our damage, plus equals the damage that's coming into the function. If this is a negative value, then you'll heal. You're adding a negative value, so you'll heal this. This number will go lower. So that's why I wanted one function to do all this, because it's super easy. It's one simple addition, and it can cover all that. This return is just return in a function is so that you can grab it from that function and send it somewhere else. So we're actually going to use this value in Blueprint eventually if we need it, and we will need it. So that is all that's for. Not much to say about that, but just return it. Okay, and then reset damage counter. You see I set it back to 0 because that's always going to be my minimum. And then debug take damage. I just called it determine damage counter value function right here, and just put in arbitrary 5 points. Since it's just a debug function, it doesn't matter if it's good or not. It's just for testing. Now there's one thing we have to do to make this function work, and that's to add input. So if you look up above, you have a function set up player input component. This function is used to bind inputs that you put in Unreal Engine and create or call functions when you do those inputs. So for example, if you're in the Unreal Engine, you can hit edit and go to project settings. Then scroll down and go to input. And there you go. You'll have action mappings and axis mappings. Action mappings are buttons and things like that, where they usually just have one value. They have pressed and release, but they only have one value of like either you're pressing it and you're going to do a punch or a jump and that's it, or if you're doing an axis mapping, you're usually doing always holding the left stick or right stick this much. So we need to do a function with this value. So if you're looking the camera around, if you whip the right stick all the way to the right, you're going to move it a lot faster than if you're just hovering in the middle, right? That's the point of these. There are technically ways around this to make it so like, oh, you can do jump as an action mapping and you'll jump lower if you hold it for less time, things like that. But basically, these are to determine between like buttons and joysticks. In our case, debug take damage, I just wanted to do it when we pressed insert. So all I did was press this little plus to make a new action mapping, rename it to debug take damage, and then I just went in here and went insert. Not inserty, but insert. That was it. Then you can close out of this window, and when you're in here, you can see that I added this one. So I copied the jumping ones, and I just changed what I needed to. The bind action here needs to be the name that you gave it in this window. I know we just closed it, but I'll show you again real quick. It needs to be the name that's in here. So mine is debug take damage. Thus, this is debug take damage. IE press means do this when I press it, not when I release the button. This is a function pointer to this function, or this class, excuse me. You don't really need to worry about that. It's just a pointer to this class. It's related to the way bind action works. And then you have the function you want to call when this input is complete. So a character is the parent class of our class, so don't use a character. Use the class you're currently in. For me, it is SSB template character. So you should do ampersand, which is the and sign, and then a SSB template character, : the name of the function you're calling. Mine was debug take damage. So this means when I press insert, I'll call this function. This function will then call this function. This function will take 5 points of damage. Got it? So that is basically all the code you're going to have to worry about today. Now let's just set up the HUD and we'll be on our way. Make sure, if this is your first time coding, make sure you build or rebuild your solution. This is how you get changes to the editor. So if you don't do this, you won't see your changes come across. It's also important to note, if you rebuild and you get errors, you might get something called a Mutex error, which sometimes just happens when the editor is still open. So sometimes you'll have to close this guy before you can rebuild. I don't exactly know why it happens. There doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason to it. But yeah, so just keep an eye out for that. Once it's rebuilt, you should either hear a sound and see a message box pop up in the bottom right of the editor, or to be safe, once it's rebuilt in Visual Studio and you see build 1 succeeded or however many, and make sure you see 0 failed, you can come in here and hit compile, and then it should compile properly. Okay, now I just made a blueprint widget, so I'll show you how to do that. I made a folder. I right-clicked and hit new folder and made a blueprints folder, and then I made add new, and you can't see it because again it goes off my screen, but if you right click, I'll try and do it here, right click, you can do user interface widget blueprint. Click that. I called mine character HUD, but it probably should be called something like main game HUD or something like that. Go into it. You'll have a blank canvas. You won't see any of this stuff here, but we're gonna fill it out so that you can get the little HUD. Okay. So first of all, what I did is, since we're going to have multiple characters at a time, I went ahead and made another canvas within this canvas. So if you click on top of this canvas, you can just Control-C, Control-V, or right-click copy, and then paste it, and you'll have this other canvas here. I made this because you can then copy this canvas and then have a second player as such. So if I could select it properly. There we go. So see how I was able to copy the canvas that we already made for player 1 and make a second player that quickly. Of course, there'll be some changes you have to do to make sure it works for player 2 instead of player 1, but this is much faster than reformatting it all yourself, and it's much more convenient, and it's also going to be the perfect values every time. If you're trying to do this by hand, you could very easily screw up. So I only want the 1 for now, so that's fine. But I'd recommend putting all this in a canvas, because if you have that, much more mutable and you can enjoy it in other instances. Okay, so there's 3 things we're going to want, and you can pick and choose if you don't want one of them for whatever reason. But we're going to want the damage counter, we're going to want the image of the character, and we're going to want the character name. So all you got to do is take 2 text boxes right here. One for the damage counter, one for the character name, and then 1 image box, which is for the player icon. When you click the the damage counter, I made mine bigger than the character name because that's how Smash Brothers does it, and I wanted to stay pretty true to that. But it doesn't matter. You can mess with that all you want. I'm not going to go over necessarily how I made it look because, there's no reason to make it. You make it look however you want to make it look. But I just set it up like this. There is one important thing for each of these, though. We have to bind them. So if you click on your damage counter, you go to Content, Text, you'll be able to click on a button that says Bind over here on the right. And then you go ahead and click New Binding, Create Binding. I've already done this, and it makes this function for you once you do it. It is this one. So it'll just have the entry node here and the return node. We're going to add functionality to get the damage from the code that we just made. So we're going to do something that isn't the best here, but it'll work for now. And in a future episode, we will make it better. The only reason we haven't done it now is because we don't have what we need yet. And I've already done it in the fighting game tutorial. So if you look on my channel, you can look at, I believe it's episode 7 of the fighting game if you want to do it the correct way right now. But don't sweat, we'll make it better later on. For now, basically just get your first index of your player controller and use this for all your logic. We're going to use this as basically the main character right now. We're not going to really factor in stuff for multiplayer until we get that functionality. So basically, right click and do Get Player Character. It's this node right here. And that'll spawn this. Drag off of this and cast to the name of your fighter character class. This is my SSB template character, remember that. So that's this right here. But it's whatever your project name is plus character on the end. Then, just drag that to your return node. All we want to do now is update this text box with the return value that we want. So since this is our damage counter, what we want to do is get the damage counter from our character. If you made it properly where it's blueprint readable and writable, you can go ahead and get damage counter. Whoops. And you'll see it right here. Then append this to a new string that we're going to make. This string right here, player 1 damage counter string, is just the variable I added over here. So all you do is hit plus variable, and then you can click the little color pill on the side and just make it a string. String is just basically text. It's basically a string of letters. It can be numbers and things like that too, but it's going to be treated basically as a text field. I called it player 1 damage counter string. And the reason I'm making it a string instead of an integer is because I want to add the percent sign on the end of it. You'll see it here, 0%. Otherwise, it could just say 0, and that's fine. I thought the percent looked better, and it's more true to the original fashion. So basically, take this string. It's going to be empty, but we're going to append the damage to it. So once this operation gets done, so you can just pull off your string, append, there it is. Drag your damage counter value into it. If you drag it from here, it'll cast for you, convert integer to string, so you'll get this little box right here. And you can see it if I do it here. Whoops. See, it just makes the box for you. Anyway, then I just went ahead and appended that result with a percent sign. That way it says 0% instead of just 0. Actually, if we take that out, you'll see what it looks like. It's just 0, but that's much uglier, so that's why we append the percent sign. So it looks like that. Whoops. And then this toString variable is another thing that'll cast automatically. So if you just drag the append into the return node, it'll create that for you. So that's all this is. So just drag from the append to the return node, and then there you go. This text box will now show your damage with the percent sign added to it. The other ones are even easier than that. So if you understood that, you're good to go. So for the player 1 character name, you do it the same way. You click on it, and then you go to your binding, and you create a new binding. This time, we want to do the same functionality. We want to use our first player character and cast it to the template character. But this time, we want to go through and use our character class. If you drag off of this and get your character class, like such, you can then do a switch statement on it. So, drag off of this and just do switch. Man, my typing is bad today. Switch on eCharacter class, that's what we called our enum. Right now we only have default, but say we had Mario, Luigi, Bowser, Peach, whatever. Well, we can't have one name that works for all of them. So what you would do is if you had multiple values on the switch, you would say default here, Mario, drag off. You can right click and make another return node. So then if it was Mario, you drag off of this and say Mario. And that's what sets that name. So as you can see here, it says mannequin in the return value. So we get mannequin. I think this is fine to hard code because the name that you have in your enum might not be what you want to display on screen. So I would hard code this unless you know that all your names are going to be what your enums are called. In which case you could use your enum character type name as the return node here. And hard code is just a term to say when you manually put in code or you manually type stuff in for each instance of, you know, a group of different things. So like characters or pickups or things like that. Hard coding is just setting a value to handle that one specific case. That's what I mean by here, how we typed in mannequin. But there you go, that's easy enough. Lastly, the player one image is basically the exact same thing. You're going to get your player character, cast to your template character. Do a switch statement, because if it's not the mannequin, we don't want to show this mannequin image here. We want to show like the Mario player icon. So you do this again, and still go to the return node. The only difference is this time, when you bind from an image, you see this? You're actually binding from appearance brush instead of content text. So you're binding from appearance brush right here. So your return node is different. It's not that string anymore. It's not that text. So what you need to do is get a image that you want to show. So all I did was scroll into this guy, and here I'll help you find him. So if you're using the template that I am, you go into mannequin in content, characters, mesh, and then this guy right here, skeletal mesh. All I did was zoom into him, move over here, and just, you know, take a shot of whatever looked good. It was about here. So you can get a screenshot if you do FN print screen or Alt print screen, depending on what you're on. Or you can use the snip tool. So if you just search and snip, snipping tool, there you go. Pretty easy stuff, but take an image of that and then add him to your project. So for me, I added him to art, UI, character icons, and this was it, mannequin profile picture. So this is the image I took. Make sure it's a PNG or something that supports transparency. That way you don't have like an ugly white background, unless you want some sort of background to it, that's fine. Then you make another variable like how we made our player one damage counter string. We're going to make a variable for mannequin character icon brush is what I called it. Again, kind of convoluted, but you know exactly what it is. So all you do is make a variable, click on it, and then search in the box here and say slate brush. Oops. And there you go. And then when you click on this variable, you'll have to compile and save first before you have this after making your variable. So make this variable, compile and save. Scroll down, you'll see default value, and then this image will be blank. Just click on this drop-down box and then select the image that you just uploaded to your project. For me, it was mannequin profile picture. Then it'll return that into the image, and that's where you get this image right here. And then if you test your insert key should be dealing damage. Of course, only 5 every time, which obviously it's not going to be like that. But again, it's just a debug function. So just make sure that number is going up and it's being represented in the game. And there you go. You've successfully started your Super Smash Brothers game. I don't have much to say in terms of anything else you should do. Usually I would say, oh yeah, you know, you could get started on this, or you could get started on doing that. But really the only thing you need to work on now is getting attacks in before you do anything else. Or you could get in multiplayer characters if you want, like if you want to get 2 players working at the same time. That would be a good thing to try too. I think attacks would be next because we need to do launching, and you know, Super Smash Brothers characters especially have a ton of attacks compared to most fighting games, or not compared to most fighting games, but similar to most fighting games. They have so many attacks. So I would say attacking or getting multiple characters spawning and working like where they're showing up in the HUD down here would be next to do. Anyway, guys, I'm Shawnthebro. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Super Smash Brothers tutorial. This is probably my most requested video series of all time. I made them back in Game Maker in the day, and people love them. And I still get messages literally every day about doing one on Unreal. So I figured I would get this started. The new schedule will probably be I'll do a fighting game tutorial, third-person tutorial, Super Smash Bros. Tutorial. I'll do them in rotation. I'm not going to add any more until we finish one of the tutorials, but I think that's manageable. If you have any specific questions or things that you want me to do, I'll still be doing individual videos of like how to do this specific thing, and it might not be related to any of the tutorials we have running. So feel free to ask me anything. Again, if you want to join the Discord, I'll be able to help you a lot more on there. It's in the description. I can put the link up on screen if you want to see it. But basically, just go in the description, look at the Join My Discord, and accept it. We allow everyone in there. And we have a bunch of friendly and helpful people who would be willing to help you out if you got confused or need help or want to move forward and have more advanced questions. Alright, guys. So that's all I got for you today. But please subscribe if this helped you or you enjoyed. That means more to me than seriously anything else you can do. And we just hit 1,200 subscribers. So thank you guys so much for all the support and all the help. I'm going to keep pumping out videos every single week. Pretty much every single Sunday you'll see a video. So subscribe if you want to see more. Ring the bell, as they say, if you want to be notified when it comes out on Sunday. And I'll see you in the next one, guys. I'm Shawnthebro. See you later.